Welcome to a new episode of Future Frames TV, the collective podcast of Traces and Dreams. I am Connie Nshemereirwe, and I am the host of A is Not for Apple, a series exploring the extent to which our education systems reflect our lived experiences as Africans, and how in turn we can transform that education system to help us more fruitfully engage with the challenges and inconsistencies that we see in our reality. My guest today is Nairobi-born paleontologist and National Geographic explorer, Dr. Isaiah Nengo, who is the Director of Research and Science at the Turkana Basin Institute, Stony Brook University in New York, and in the Turkana Basin in Kenya. Very welcome, Isaiah.
Thank you to have me, Connie.
Isaiah is a paleontologist, which means he studies human origins. And he's best known for having led the team that discovered a 13 million year skull of an infant ape known as a Lessie, which threw new light on the evidence that our common ancestor lived in Africa more than 10 million years ago. And today I look forward to getting your thoughts on what all this means for us as a continent and a people, but most importantly, as part of the transformation of our education systems. Before we dive in, though, Isaiah, I have a question for you. And this is, when you hear the phrase, A is not for Apple, what comes to mind?
To me, what comes to mind is the Eurocentric education that we received, associating every basic form of knowledge with things European. And to the extent where when we even think about the alphabet and the letters, which, by the way, the alphabet is Phoenician, but when we think about, words, just common words and things that we pick out there that would stand for those words, we immediately got into things that are, quote unquote, of European origin. So we could have picked another fruit or another object that is from anywhere to stand for the very first letter of the alphabet, A. So I think that when you say that expression, it seems to me that this is a conscious attempt to get away from the Eurocentric view of the world and perhaps to place other places into the centers of intellectual thought and conversations.
Yeah. I agree with you, obviously. And that's why I chose this title for the podcast, because it struck me that I learned the alphabet when I had never seen or tasted an apple. I mean, I first tasted an apple at the age of 15. And
yes.
They've only started growing in Uganda in the last maybe 10 years. So it's quite odd to see this chart in every primary school across the land that starts with this concept, A is for Apple.
Exactly. And similar experience to you that, I was brought up as a Christian. My parents were Christians. I'm not. There was always a story about the original sin and how, God made this beautiful place, fantastic place with everything that we needed or Adam and Eve needed. And then Eve gets tempted in that the fruit at the center of the temptation was the apple. And as a kid, I was puzzled. What is this apple that is the cause of all this misery? I mean, this must be one heck of a fruit, because I'd never seen one, never tasted one. And I'm thinking, if it was a mango, I'd understand, but apple, I mean, what is this apple thing? So I was always puzzled about this exactly.
How powerful this fruit is. Very interesting.
Right.
All right. So your journey from childhood in Kenya to making some of the most historical finds in the study of human origins is, I find, really fascinating. Could you tell us a little bit about the highlights along the way and how you arrived at making this discovery?
Right. So the journey for me starts off with my general interest in space and concepts of space and time. Growing up, we had a library close to us, run by the City Council of Nairobi, and I remember going there as I think as a 7, 8-year-old, 9-year-old. I loved reading. And I'll go there and read about, one of the things I like to really read about were explorers and discovery, people going out and exploring these new and wonderful places. I was completely blown away by the whole exploration, the whole mission to the moon. And, so I think as a child, I was always intrigued by distant past and places. And then, but the real journey started when I was in high school, and there was a program that brought high school students in Nairobi to the national museums for a field trip. And at the end of the field trip, we went and we saw the galleries, and then at the end of the field trip, we were ushered into this auditorium at the museum, and we were told that we're going to get a lecture from somebody. And they didn't even tell us the topic of the lecture. So strides in this tall white guy, introduces himself as Richard Leakey. He's the first white person I saw up close, by the way. And then he goes on to give us a lecture on plate tectonics and human evolution. So the whole notion that the planet that we sit in, which for me had been this farm place, that this planet, the continents had been migrating, then a brand new idea, and the whole notion that humans evolved in Africa, that humanity, the root of humanity is in Africa, just really got a hold of me. And then I had another lecture from Richard Leakey in my second year of university, and by the time I graduated, I was convinced that this is the thing that I really wanted to do. So, for most of us coming from poor families, going to the University of Nairobi, or going to a university at all, was always about finding a career that was going to secure the family financially.
Yeah.
But I don't know for what reason I took a different approach, in that when I graduated, I asked myself, what is it that you really have a passion for? And can you pursue a career? It's a risk on something you have a passion for. And it just came to me that paleontology, human evolution was the thing I wanted to do. So I wrote a letter to Richard and his wife, who was the head of the paleontology division, Meave Leakey, proclaiming my interest in becoming a paleontologist. And I think they were surprised, because it's not the type of thing that an African kid growing up in the dusty streets of Nairobi typically wants to do. So they invited me for an interview. And after the interview, I was informed that there wasn't a position at the National Museums at that time, but they would get in touch with me when something showed up. So I went away, and then I came back about a week later, and I ran into Meave Leakey at the entrance of the museum, and I told her, hey, I would like to volunteer. And she looked at me and she thought, is this kid crazy or is he serious? And I think she realized that I was actually quite serious. So she took me by the hand, gave me an office, gave me a book called The Evolution of African Mammals. It's considered the Bible of mammalian paleontology in Africa. And she marched into the collections. And this is perhaps the best vertebrate mammal, best vertebrate paleontology collection, arguably in Africa, because it stretches way back in time. You cannot tell the story of how mammals evolved in Africa without this collection. And you cannot tell the story about how mammals evolved without the collection from Africa. And so she said, well, you're going to go through this collection and this section, and you're going to help us to sort it out. If things are in the wrong place, in the process, you'll learn. And so that's what I my first job. I was the first person in, the last person out for, I think, 6 months. And they realized this kid is actually quite serious. He's into this. So Richard called me in the office and he said, we're going to give you a fellowship. And I said, okay, very good. And the section that I had been unleashed into was a time period that we call the Miocene. And this lasts from about 20 million years ago to 5 million years ago. And when the dinosaurs go extinct, Africa was an isolated continent. It was not connected to any other continent. And so once the dinosaurs are off the face of this planet, the mammals, which had evolved with the dinosaurs and had lived side by side with them for over 100 million years, finally now had a chance to spread out. And they begin to diversify. And in Africa, because it was isolated from the rest of the world, we evolved a very unique set of mammals that collectively we belong to a group called the Afrotheria. Very, very different. Includes things like the ancestors of the elephants, the ancestors of hyraxes, the dugong, the stellar sea cow, also the ancestors come from this group. And so later on, Africa makes contact with Europe and Asia, and you begin to get things that had also evolved in Europe and Asia begin to migrate into Africa. In the Miocene, the time period that I was released in, still has a significant number of the old Africa and the changing Africa. But it's so different from what you see now. If you were to go back into a safari, if you were to go back and do time travel and do a safari, the mammals you'd meet in Uganda, the mammals you'd meet in Kenya would be entirely different. So I was like a kid who was in some kind of fable and seeing these mammals, I was like, so every evening I would meet with my friends and I would regale them with the tales of these creatures long gone that used to live in Africa. And they would just be like, wow, you're totally into this. And then, so Richard said, if you want to do this seriously, you have to get a PhD. And I said, well, but I don't like school. I was a terrible student at the University of Nairobi. I was more involved with politics and just having a good time. I didn't study very seriously, so I barely passed. So he said, no, you have to go to school. I said, okay, where should I go to school? And his advice is that I should go to school in America. So he gave me a list of 5 schools. I applied and they summarily rejected my application. And one of them wrote back to Richard and they said, I can't believe this guy wants to go to school in America. These are the worst grades I've ever seen in my life. But he also has some tremendous recommendations. So I had recommendations from some of the top people in the disciplines because they had an opportunity to work with me. So they thought that I had promise, but as I like to put it, my transcript said I was a total idiot, and my recommendation said I was a brother of Jesus. So they were intrigued. So I went to America, and I went to Harvard, and I actually did well, and I was admitted into the regular program, and then. I did well, but I decided to stay. So, and it was, and by then Richard had left the museum, and things were a little bit tough. And I tried to make my way in America, and it proved to be very, very difficult. I mean, I just got to say outright that the way academia is structured, if you don't have backing and mentors, and there are systems, and if you're not part of that system. Unfortunately, we Africans are not part of that system because we don't have mentors. Where very few mentors are in the system that can take us under their wings and help us to grow through the process. So I just wasn't getting anywhere. My papers were not being published. I was getting no grants. So I eventually left the discipline altogether and went to teach high school at an inner city in the West Coast. And I was a biology teacher with a Harvard PhD for 2.5 years in America. And then after 2.5 years, I said, you know what? I love teaching these kids. I got to learn about the Black experience in America in a way that I was not familiar with before. And it has had a tremendous impact on how I view life. And I could not exchange it for anything else. But I decided that I wanted to come back to higher academia. So I started teaching in a community college, and I got a job teaching part-time, actually full-time, but on a contract at UC Berkeley in California. And then I got a job full-time teaching at a community college, De Anza College in Cupertino in the Silicon Valley. And then in 2012, I decided that it was time for me to go back to doing paleontology. So I applied for and was successful in getting a Fulbright, which allowed me to come back to Kenya and teach at the University of Nairobi, and also to restart my fieldwork. And I met with Richard, and I expressed an interest to go back to Turkana and start doing fieldwork in Turkana. Richard was very welcoming. And so I had some funds from the Leakey Foundation, and I launched this field project in 2013. And I clearly remember 2014, nobody really wanted to go to this particular site called Napudet because it's very difficult to find fossils there. And the thinking was that if the Leakeys had been there and they hadn't found anything, you're wasting your time going there. So nobody wanted to go with me. A person who originally was supposed to be my geologist bailed out on me. It was really difficult for me to raise a team. But eventually we were successful. We went and we made the big discovery. The next year, everybody wanted to go to the field with me because we now had a big discovery. And so that tiny little scow has had a major impact in my career. It has opened up paths and doors. And so currently I left my job in California, came to Stony Brook, took up the job at TBI, rejoined with my mentor, Richard Leakey. And so now I'm the director for research and science with this fantastic institute that he has put together to help build the discipline in Africa. And I'm involved with a number of very interesting projects. One of them is to construct a model that is going to help us understand the evolution of the landscape, East African landscape, starting from 20 million years to the present. And not only that, the model is also superimposed with a climate model. So we'll look at how climate and landscape interact. And now that has driven the way the plants look and the way the mammals look in the present. So that's a short synopsis of the trajectory of my career.
Fascinating. I think you had a lot of luck along the way, but I think you were also a very determined person and just tried to go after what you were not sure was possible, but you went after it anyway. And you had a few detours teaching biology in high school and this and the other, but clearly the dream lived on, or the desire lived on. And it's also really striking that this was something that occurred to you as a 7 or 8-year-old boy in a library, you said, and then you went on to visit a museum. And for me, those things strike me because it's you never know what a single book or a single field trip will result in. And these are things that are quite underrated sometimes in our education systems. I was also struck by you mentioning that unlike many young men and women that go to university, you chose to follow a career that was not going to be immediately financially rewarding. And hearing you describe all the different things that we can discover, mammals that are now extinct, or how the mammals that we see around us are, how they came about, or how our landscapes were formed. And I often think the same thing about African history. I think about all the archaeological finds that are yet to be found, and all the rich knowledge that is not discovered. And it begs the question why we continue always to go after being lawyers, doctors, or engineers. And I say this having chosen to do engineering myself, that I have since, that I quit 2 years in, I just realized it wasn't my passion at all. Right. But I wonder if you might reflect on that. So apart from, how could we change that trend? I guess you're only one of a few non-traditional, I mean, looking at the path that you've taken and the struggles you had of even having people, setting up teams, or you more or less have to introduce the study of paleontology into the country, into the East African region, or into Africa in general. But I wonder if you can reflect on this trend of how we produce all these people and all the other things that remain unexplored on the African continent.
Yeah, I think I can probably trace it. We can probably trace it to our colonial experience. And there's so much, I mean, the colonial experience was such a traumatic and it was such a seminal event in our collective history in Africa. And it's left traumas that have not healed. It has left traumas that we have not dealt with properly. And, so what we were told by our colonial masters was that there was no history in Africa until the colonialists arrived. There was nothing of value in our lives, apart from what we were told was of value. And so when the education system was introduced in Africa, or the formal or the current education formalist system that we inherited was introduced in Africa, it was mainly to train us in those areas that we were told were useful, in areas that we were told the colonialists knew were going to be useful in helping them to exploit us and to exploit our resources. So we were only allowed to be clerks. We were only allowed to be teachers up to a certain level in certain subjects. And everything else was not of value. And I can tell you that until I came to the United States, there's so many things that we were told that were not of value. And I was shocked and surprised to come to America to realize that those very same things that we were told to be or not of value were of great value in these countries that colonized us. Yeah. So I remember growing up, the two things I loved were playing soccer and dancing. And actually, playing soccer was considered to be relatively useful. Dancing was, I mean, if you told anybody that you're going to be a dancer, they just thought that, are you out of your mind? What a waste of your time.
What uselessness is this?
Yeah, I mean, what dancing? Are you crazy? What's got into you? We used to be punished for playing soccer, and so music, art, both the fine art and the performance arts, and especially our traditional theaters of art, what we were told that these are things that are completely useless. And the only things that were going to be useful were practical things, as you say, engineering, medicine, and things like that. And I still remember being told, what, you're going to Harvard to learn to be what, a paleontologist? What good is that going to do Africa? why don't you do something? Why don't you spend your time and effort? And why doesn't Africa spend its time and effort in subjects that are more meaningful? And so I think that we have not yet decolonized our minds from that mindset, and realizing that social sciences, learning about the societies that we live in, the history of the societies that we live in, are key to forming a society that is grounded and stable. And also understanding that because for us, economics and all the conversations I hear about in Africa are surrounded around economics. Oh yes, economic development is important, but our view of what is of value that we can share in the markets is so still influenced by the colonial experience. The concept of markets and what is valuable out here is so much broader. Sports is an industry. I still see people complaining about the soccer clubs that we have in Kenya, and that all they associate soccer with hooliganism and bad things. And yet Kenyans are crazy about Arsenal and Man U and all. These are incredibly valuable assets, companies so my goodness, they're waiting to be exploited. They're waiting to be developed. The history is incredibly invaluable. I keep telling people that there are more museums than McDonald's and Starbucks combined in the United States. Think about all the outlets, McDonald's coffee outlets, Starbucks outlets, and think about hamburger joints. There are more museums in America than those things combined. Because the stories, the heritage is big business. The museum industry employs as many people as the automobile industry. It is that valuable. So I think that if we could consciously get to realize that what we think is valuable is still very much encased in the colonial mindset that we were left with. If we can break that, we can use our education system to break that, then we'll get to see that there's value in things like paleontology and art and dance and music and other subjects, other things that we can do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I was just reflecting on what you were saying just now about the things that we consider valuable. And it reminds me of the keynote that you gave when I first heard you speak. If we could only comprehend what it means to be an African and to live in the land where man has originated, and to live a woman, humankind, and to be part of such a wide diversity, it's a genetic diversity. I remember you saying that Africans would, by logic, be the tallest and the shortest and the smartest, and unfortunately the dumbest. But for us to just think about, besides that, all the value that we don't see, that it's incredible to me that you tell me how many museums there are in the United States, and to think back to how your own journey started. But I don't know how many museums there are in Nairobi. There might just be the one. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I think there probably there's one proper museum. That's it, really.
Yeah.
There's one. That's it. Yeah.
I was just thinking, if we were to take more pride in, or recognize more of these things that we do not value, would you imagine with me how different our lives would be? Can you imagine what the effect it might have on industry, on knowledge production, on our lives as Africans, if we recognize the value that is beyond these narrow colonial boundaries of what is valuable. I don't know if.
Oh my goodness, it would be. I don't even know how to express it. I mean, we haven't even begun to tap a tenth of the value that we have, and I like to use this. Little story that one of my friends, who's a professor at University of Legon in literature, is from Ghana. Many, many years ago, he was telling me a story about how he'd gone to the market to buy bananas. And there was, the banana, as you know how our open air markets are, you get this wonderful bananas displayed to you. And then he was looking kind of inside the stall, and there was some bananas that were even more fantastic. And he said, I want to buy those ones. And the banana lady said, no, you can't buy those ones. The ones that are for you are these other ones, which are still good bananas, and some not so great. He said, no, I want to buy those ones. And the price doesn't matter. I really just want to get those. And the lady said, no, you can't buy those. And he said, oh, also, by the way, tell me, who are you saving those for? And she said, oh, I'm saving those for some white couple. So these are your bananas.
Just before you said that, the penny dropped. I thought, oh no.
Yeah. Right.
Oh no.
Right. So that's how we treat ourselves. That's how we treat our children. I cannot imagine, the schools that we put our children into when we have the capacity of giving them the best schools. The thing that we subject ourselves to. I mean, I go to our road networks. I go to our, you go to Nairobi. Just what we give ourselves. We settle for so little when we have the capacity and we have the raw materials and we have the brains. The only thing that is lacking is that sense of entitlement, that we are as good as anybody and we deserve as good as anyone. If that clicks in, then, the way we build houses, the way we build roads, the way we build hospitals, everything that we do, we're just going to be doing much better. And I'm beginning to see that. I'm beginning to see, you now go to these malls, you look at how the markets that we used to have ourselves and the malls that we're building now, you're beginning to see apartment buildings in Nairobi and what we used to put ourselves into. It's beginning to seep in. We're beginning to feel like, I'm entitled to this.
Yeah.
We have it all there. We just need to have that mindset of once that clicks in that we deserve, then it's all there for us for the taking.
Yeah. And as you speak, I always, of course, as an educator, think about the millions of children that are going to be added to our population in the next 20, 30 years. I believe our population will double, something like this. And if you speak specifically about the education systems that our children have access to, and especially my particular passion is the teachers, the attention that we pay to them, the position that we give them, how important we take them, or how the attention that we pay to them, knowing that they are the people who our children will be raised by. It really boggles the mind.
Yes.
Even for our own children, we don't appear to care that they don't have better, or we don't believe that they deserve better. They can take what's there, what's available.
And I like to tell everybody that this whole thing goes back to the days when we were enslaving each other, and that we just did not understand our value. So we would capture each other one tribe would capture members of another tribe, and the other tribe would capture members of the other tribe, and then would sell each other to the
Arab traders or to the whoever was coming around to buy us. Yeah.
And guess what we were getting? We were getting trinkets,
beads.
We were getting beads and whiskey and a little bit of cloth. And then look at what they were making out of our people once they got to the West. They built the economies there. And I'm telling people that we're still doing the same thing. We're still selling each other for a pittance. And I what I say, sell me, Connie. I'm happy if you sell me, but get a real value. What bothers me is how little we sell each other for, because we don't realize just what we were worth and what we have and what it is worth. But once we can break through that, then, and I'm beginning to see it. I begin to see our people demanding a little bit better than what we've been giving each other. We're demanding more out of each other than we did before. We get out of mentality. We have it all. I mean, we have the raw resources. We have the weather. We have what it needs to be able to.
Human resource. Yeah.
Yes. Right. No, and I think that the story realizing that humanity starts in Africa. Africa nurtured humanity. It's not that that bad, terrible place that we are made to believe it is. That's where it starts. Is that no Africa, no humanity.
Yeah. And as you speak, I'm reminded of a cousin of mine who found out in her teen years that her great grandmother used to be a warrior woman. And she said how that knowledge really changed her perspective of herself as a woman. And she always feels strong enough and able to accomplish feats simply because of the knowledge that she's descended from a warrior queen, I believe it was. And I really feel that these stories should be told better. I mean, when you say that, I think I've even read a quote from an English historian whose name escapes me now, who said there wasn't, that before the Europeans arrived in Africa, there isn't any history, only darkness, which is patently false. But this is what we all believe. And if only we can reconstruct these stories and tell them far and wide and really enable our children to, I suppose we grown-ups are also able to, for her imagination to be captured, but I think children's imagination is even easier to capture, and their personality and their aspirations and their value can really be transformed if they hear these stories early enough. And I think it's up to us to tell these stories. I was reading about Alessi, of course, and I went on to read about Lucy. If I'd never traveled within Africa, which is something that we also do very little of, I feel so privileged that I've been able to travel within Africa, because I went to Benin and I've been to some countries and I've almost felt I've had a religious experience. I went to Zimbabwe and I went to the Great Zimbabwe. This was a religious experience for me, because I thought, wow, my own ancestors put up these structures and they stand till now. I try to imagine the activity that was going on then, the trade and the culture. But these are stories that are not told. I only found out about the Great Zimbabwe, and I have a PhD in education. I only found out about the Great Zimbabwe, I think in 2018 or some 2017. It's ridiculous. Right. I wonder, maybe as we come to the close of my questioning or our conversation, what potential or opportunities do you see for us to enable our children to believe something else?
You hit the nail on the head when you say it's about stories, about telling, sharing, finding these stories and sharing these stories with our people. and especially our children.
Yeah.
Storytelling is I think, one of the things that makes us unique as human beings. It ties us together. It's how we remember who we are. And when we remember who we are, then we can then chart a future. We can then chart a path. If I wake up today and I don't remember where I was yesterday, I don't know whether I should wake up and go left or go right. I have to know where I'm coming from in order to know what's going on. It's a storytelling that is powerful. Mm-hmm. And that's why I appreciate what you're doing so much, that you are creating and providing the platform to be able to begin to tell these stories.
Yeah.
I have the stories in this particular arena. But I don't have the platform that you have to be able to tell the story. So by sharing this with me, I think that's the right thing to do. I'd like to be able to go across Africa and be able to tell these stories. I haven't figured out why, but I will. I want to be able to go to Benin. I want to be able to come to Kampala. I want to be able to go to Africa and sit and break bread with our brethren out there and share these stories. And yeah. I think that's what's going to change the tide. And in the film industry, I can already begin to see that we're doing a fantastic job telling the stories. The music, here in Kenya, they love the Afrobeat. They love the music from so the artists are already beginning to talk to each other. And people listening to the music are beginning to, so there's what's going on in Nigeria. But in these deeper stories, like the ones that we have, we're still not participants in the process of uncovering the stories, and we are hardly participants in telling the stories.
Absolutely.
I've just been recruited into the National Geographic stable of speakers. In 2 weeks, I will be in Lone Tree, Colorado, deep in the middle of the interior. I'll be telling these stories. But I don't have an opportunity yet to tell the stories in Africa because National Geographic doesn't cover Africa yet. So I think that the future is in us understanding, like you and I do, how important these stories are, and find a medium in which, and even if I can't go, but we have what we're doing right now. Your podcast will get to Benin. Your podcast will get me to other corners of Africa. And by doing that, then we can really begin to change how people think and how people feel about ourselves.
Yeah, you're giving me some good ideas because I am also part of a project which is trying to set up more museums across Africa. But I have long thought that there are more efficient ways of getting the story out, because waiting to build museums and equip them and then have children from across the country travel to the museums is not very efficient in my view. So I think it's easier for us to be mobile, to move to the children through whatever media that we have. And so hearing you say that just now clarified that for me. And I think I'm glad that you view me as a vehicle, and I embrace the responsibility or the role of carrying these stories. And obviously, when I started the podcast, I had no idea. I still don't really have an idea where the podcast will go. But I have a sense that I just have to speak to my fellow scholars, especially because we uncover a lot of things, and even the things that we have not uncovered, we do read about them and we discover, this is what outsiders know about us that we don't know about ourselves, and we can more easily tell those stories. And so for me also, I look forward, and I think if maybe you can just think about it a little bit, if you were to do something tomorrow, just the first thing that you would do to begin the transformation that our education systems need to bring this greater awareness of who we are, or this greater sense of pride in who we are, what would you do?
Right. This is. I would say the same thing that I said when you first had me speak in Nairobi, and that is that we have to engage our policymakers. We have to find a way to engage the people who make policy on curriculum, so we can change that curriculum. So that curriculum can be centered around understanding who we are and how we got here. I think the curriculum is the most powerful tool that we can use to bring about systemic and long-term change. So that's the first thing that I would do.
Yeah, reach out to the people who make the decisions on what stays in the curriculum. I must tell you, when I analyze the reforms that have been going on in the curricula in Uganda, at any rate, it's always about what must stay, what cannot be removed. Because again, it's about this is valuable.
Yes.
Mainly because maybe it was passed down to us.
Mm-hmm.
And this attachment to this content, to me, I find really interesting, to say the least, because you ask yourself, I mean, knowledge is not static. And keep in mind that these curricula were developed to serve different purposes. Mm-hmm. We must determine our own purpose and then determine the curriculum that should get us to this purpose, rather than, I always think, why are you concentrating on what can't change rather than what can change?
Yeah. So, it sort of reminds me of the fight to change the constitution in Kenya, which took a lot of blood and sweat. They didn't want to change it. And it was like, why don't you want to change it? We've inherited a constitution based on principles that were meant to exploit us. And then when we changed it, it was like, oh, we should have done this a long time ago. So I think the next fight we need to wage is a fight to change the curriculum so it better suits what we really need to get accomplished going forward.
Yeah, we have a job to do, and I appreciate your own part that you're playing, and I appreciate you coming on this podcast and sharing with us your thoughts on how we might transform the futures of African children and our own selves as a society. Maybe we shall speak again soon. Thanks a lot, Isaiah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah. All right, Isaiah, maybe you hear from me again. It was really a pleasure to speak to you.